I'm with Amy Zewe from the Jerusalem Connection Report. Now, Amy, what is the Jerusalem Connection Report?
The Jerusalem Connection Report is a Christian Zionist nonprofit organization based in the United States dedicated to inform, educate, and activate Christian support for Israel and the Jewish people. Our elevator pitch is that we are dedicated to tell the story of Israel and its people, both ancient and modern, and we have several different capacities in which to achieve that mission.
And you have something called Red Alert on your website. What is that?
So the Red Alert report was commissioned by our founder, Dr. Reverend Jim Hutchins, who has since passed away. We started it in about 2010, 2011, and he asked me to provide a weekly report that reflects on the BDS movement, boycott, divest, sanction, the situations on college campuses with the uptick in anti Semitism, to monitor the UN and other organizations that are either participating in BDS or espousing anti Semitic or anti Zionist philosophies or positions. And of course, in the last, I guess that's, oh gosh, almost 15 years now that we've been doing it, 14 years. I mean, I feel like a failure because those things have exploded exponentially, but that is what the Red Alert Report is for. It's an outlet to report on, interview experts, and tell our audience what's going on regarding those topics, anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, and the war on Israel in general.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, have you seen an upturn since October the 7th, particularly in anti-Semitism?
It has been not just an upturn, it's like an explosion. It's like a tidal wave. Instead of a slow rising tide, which is what we saw before the 7th, it just turned into a tidal wave. And it's so disheartening because even though we are fully, the Jerusalem Connection has always been aware of anti-Semitism in the church, both in church history as well as the modern church. And we always spoke out against it and countered things like replacement theology. But those voices, those replacement theology voices, and that undercurrent, it was almost like an undercurrent of anti-Semitism in the church since October 7th. It's far more outspoken and far more obvious. And it's disheartening, but it is definitely the battle we're engaged in because it is our mandate to to expose anti-Semitism wherever we find it, and that includes in the church.
Is this partly because of the media or different organizations? We see the United Nations is saying that Israel is committing a genocide, but we see Great Britain is saying that Israel isn't committing a genocide. Germany says Israel isn't. So is it just a lot of confusion around, or is this real anti-Semitism?
I think it's a little of both. I think the confusion leads to an authentic anti-Semitism out of ignorance, right? I would say the majority of congregants, if they're presented with a clear set of facts that is not sort of shadowed or blurred or confused, I think they would come to a correct conclusion. Some clergy speak out of ignorance, and some clergy will speak out of a long adherence to replacement theology, unwilling to look at scriptures in their correct light because of things like church tradition. So I think it's a mixture of both those things. The media, of course, plays a part, and sometimes you wonder whether media is a reflection of society's sentiments or is driving society's sentiments. I'm not sure I have an answer for that, but in either case, the Jerusalem Connection is an outlet to espouse that truth of what's going on in Israel today, that they are not committing a genocide, and we certainly amplify those sources, those secular sources and governmental sources that have documented those truths.
Now, in the church, there seems to be sort of two camps. You've got the camp that says God gave this land as an eternal covenant, and they believe that Israel should be in the land. You also have the camp of replacement theology that says, no, 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 all these promises have now gone to the church. Does replacement theology sort of maybe deliberately or accidentally encourage anti Semitism?
Again, I think that's both. I think that replacement theology is at its core trying to separate Christians from their Jewish roots and trying to nullify the eternal covenants that God has made with Abraham and the nation and people of Israel. And as a result of that, I think that people that fall under replacement theologians' teachings, whether they're part of a mainline church or just part of a society that sort of echoes those sentiments. For example, modern Europe is not a church going population, and yet entire population, Spain, Portugal, France, other places, they're post-Christian, they're post-Catholic, so to speak, and yet those sentiments remain. So I would say it might seem accidental, but I believe it's probably engineered by the enemy.
Do you think sometimes it's like there's a call for justice? So, the replacement theologians say, well, we want justice because look at big Israel is just hurting the little tiny Palestinian. Do you think that's part of it?
I think that idea of social justice, as we define it now in our modern society, definitely plays into it. One iteration of replacement theology is that Palestinian narrative of it, that somehow the Palestinians were the first people and the indigenous people of the land. I'm not sure if that means Arab. I'm not even sure how they define it. I've seen rhetoric that Jesus was Palestinian. I've seen rhetoric that the Jews that were even in the area of Judea aren't the Jews that are in Israel today. A lot of contradictions in logic with some of those theories, but that replacement theology and that social justice idea have somehow gotten married to produce this new iteration of replacement theology that takes in this mythological Palestinian narrative.
What are some of the projects that you're involved in with the Jerusalem Connection report?
Well, we have our Red Alert Report, which is a weekly outlet of news and interviews with subject matter experts. We have our Bible Fiber Bible study that our president, Shelley Neese, issues every Friday. That's an in-depth look at the prophets in the Tanakh. The Minor Prophets was a year-long series. She just finished up Ezekiel, and it's a wonderful Bible study that you can listen to as a podcast and really walks you through what we call the Old Testament, the Hebrew text, and for Christians to get really enlightened on the promises of God, the character of God, and the uniqueness of the Jewish people and the history of the nation of Israel. We also support Aliyah initiatives, support an organization called Bad Kaim, which is a pro-life organization in Israel that serves the community of women who might find themselves in a crisis pregnancy. And we also have educational outlets around Holocaust education using art and other venues to share that story. And since October 7th, we have gotten into the field as part of our education outreach to create documentaries that chronicle what had happened on October 7th and since with Israel and the Jewish people as part of our ongoing effort to tell the story of Israel and its people, both ancient and modern.
Are you helping Jews that are in Ukraine come to the land?
Yes, that's one of our initiatives that started. We actually had a small support system into Ukraine before the invasion by Russia. We have some very good friends, Ina and Michael Ragate. They were good friends of Jim Hutchins and Pat Hutchins, and they curated our art collection on exhibition through Europe about a decade ago. And as a result of what has been happening in the Ukraine since the Russian invasion, we are working to support a Jewish community center in Ukraine that has remained operational and working with the senior citizen community that is unable to flee as refugees. They can't move out of the area, move into Poland or elsewhere, or even to Israel for that matter. And also that serves the children in that Jewish community because a lot of the parents of those small children are caretakers for the elderly, and because of that couldn't flee during the war. A lot of women, of course, and children. So we support that Jewish Community Center in Israel in providing funding. We work through a rabbi that has connections into Poland, and they can get supplies, medicine, other kinds of supplies into that Jewish Community Center to serve that population during this hard time until these hostilities were coming up on is it 4 years now that they've been in a state of war.
Tell us a bit about the rebuilding the medical school. What actually happened there?
So during the 12-day war, which was just in June, Shelley Neese was actually in Israel. She was part of a dig in Shiloh, and she was only mere miles from Soroka Hospital when that Iranian missile hit it. And she didn't have a good news feed from where she was, but it was absolutely devastating to her because she lived in that community during her husband's years. He was a medical school student at Soroka, and
Mm.
she was a student at Ben Gurion. So as she heard the news of this devastating missile into the hospital, it was, I gosh, it was must have been like 12 hours before she got word that there were no casualties and that the hospital was evacuated in time. But I mean, she was just distraught because she knew every inch of this hospital. She lived there, she worked there, she studied there. Her husband got his training there. He's a physician now. And so when she got back to the States, she had to escape through Israel, as a matter of fact. She had managed to get home just as the war concluded. No one knew it was only going to be 12 days. And we decided collectively that we were going to take a direct initiative and appeal to our network to help support the rebuilding, which is a huge undertaking. So our niche is the medical school facilities, the classrooms, the places where the physicians in training are learning and getting the mastery of their craft so that they can better serve or can end up serving the community there in southern Israel. So that is why we're supporting Soroka Hospital rebuilding. And we do have a mechanism on our website to donate to that particular cause. There's a doctor shortage in Israel, so we want to be a part of alleviating that pain.
Wow. How important is Christian Zionism today?
Christian Zionism is more important than ever, and that term Zionism or Zionist is getting so mutilated in the press. People define it as in a variety of different ways, and I just want to appeal to Christians to really become biblically literate and historically literate and contemporarily literate on what's happening, the place of Israel's place in God's redemptive plan, and what God has told us as Christians regarding our need to support and love our Jewish brothers and sisters and their nation. So I want to call it Christian support for Israel and the Jewish people. Essentially, we are Christian Zionists, and Christian Zionists are the core of what can be that barricade of protection, because the Jewish people in the West, in the collective West, are less than 2%. So, I mean, total of 15 million or so, but we've got hundreds of millions of Christians that can stand beside and in front of their persecuted cousins, as well as we need to understand that that persecution is coming our way too. When you stand with Israel, you stand in the crossfires.
Does it come from the book of Genesis? I will give you this land as an eternal covenant. Is that where Christian Zionism comes from?
It is. The core of it is Genesis 12:3, but we need to remember that if you're reading and studying your Tanakh and even your New Testament, that God reiterates those promises explicitly or implicitly over 1,000 times in the Hebrew text. And Paul reiterates it in Romans 9 through 11. There's many places in the New Testament as well that codify and reinforce that idea of God's eternal promise, his covenants to Israel and the Jewish people, and it is all for his name's sake. It's irrevocable, and it is also not just like Jesus' promise to us. When we put our trust in him, it's not about what we do. It's about what he does, what the promise that he keeps. And we need to recognize that as we see Christians and the news pointing fingers at an imperfect Israel or an imperfect Jew, aren't we as just as imperfect as Christians and as finger pointers? And we need to understand that God's grace and mercy is enduring, and his covenants they're not revoked. They're irrevocable. And until we understand that, we will never be able to see Israel for what it is in God's redemptive plan, and love the Jewish people just like we love everybody.
Mm. Why do you do what you do?
That's an interesting question. I really feel like it's a mandate. I mean, I grew up on Long Island. I grew up in an evangelical Christian home. We went to a very small church where the pastor taught out of the Hebrew text. And I was surrounded by Jewish neighbors, Jewish school teachers in my public school, just a very diverse community, and we celebrated each other. And then when I saw anti-Semitism start to manifest, it was like an attack on my own family. It was an attack on my own community. And I can't just stay silent. I can't stay silent. And I kind of fell into the Jerusalem connection just by meeting Jim and his office manager and folks like Susan Michael from the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. Because of my friendships with these people, I just more and more wanted to participate in that kind of work.
What is your prayer for Israel at this time, particularly as we come very close? It's Rosh Hashanah in the next few days, and we're coming very close to the anniversary of October the 7th. What is your prayer for Israel at this time?
My prayer for Israel is that God's hedge of protection can remain over them and ease their pain. My prayer for Jewish people in Israel and elsewhere is that they continue to turn their face toward God. God spends a lot of time telling all of us that if we return to Him, He returns to us, even though we know that He will protect us and we know the end of the story, so to speak. My prayer is that Israelis just keep turning their head towards Hashem, and they take comfort in His grace and His peace, and have strength that they can endure this persecution, and that they can understand that there are Christians around the world that are praying for them. And I would just want them to feel our support and feel our prayer and not feel alone, which is what I'm sure a lot of Jewish people and Israeli people, they feel alone. And that breaks my heart when I hear that. You're not alone, and we're praying for you. And I just hope they feel it.
What's your website for people who'd like to know more about the work that you do?
Thank you for asking. It is JerusalemConnection.us, the JerusalemConnection.us, no spaces. We're also on all the socials, Instagram, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, and we have our YouTube channel where you can find both the Red Alert and Bible Fiber. And we're also on most podcast platforms.
Well, Amy, thank you very much for sharing today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.